Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Malu Dubim in Israel. Nothing quite perks up the sense of indignance like a miscarriage of justice. We tend to be outraged by such things, seeing them as nothing less than a perversion of everything good in the world. We may have no connection whatsoever with the case at hand, but we are still highly offended by blatant injustice. We expect things to be done right, especially in the realm of the law. So injustice strikes us as something which is personally offensive. This is not the way things were meant to be. This sense of indignance stems from an inherent desire for things to be fair. Little children seem to have this ingrained in their minds from a very early age. They are always complaining that something or other isn't fair, usually in regard to the way they are treated by a parent or some adult. They have this inner compass for what is fair and what isn't that seems to be hardwired into the brain. It isn't clear where little kids get this from, but every parent knows the universal complaint. That's not fair. This carries over into later life to varying degrees, depending on the experiences of the person. Some learn relatively early to not expect fairness in life and may give up on it as a personal need. Many others, however, never forsake this noble quest and insist upon it as a God-given right, no matter how many times they experience the opposite. Is it a sign of maturity to demand justice, or is it a relic of childhood that we should learn to grow out of? Most people would probably say that justice is indeed a noble pursuit that should not be abandoned, no matter how many times they witness unfairness in life. It is one of those things that simply have to be. Even though there is no real justice in the animal world, and there probably wasn't much in the early stages of human existence, civilization has evolved to the point that this is about as human defining a characteristic as there is in the world. Everything falls apart without some expectation that things have to be fair and correct. Without it, we are really just animals, and nobody wants that. But what happens when the inevitable miscarriage of justice hits us right between the eyes? We all know that these things happen with regularity, so it shouldn't strike us with surprise when it does. But it does. Every time we experience it, we have the same reaction. That's outrageous. We only begin to lose this outrage when we have been jaded to the point of cynicism, a highly undesirable state of mind. But these outrages keep coming, and we all know that they are just as much a part of life as the changing of the seasons. So what is the remedy for this affront to everything we hold dear about fairness in the world? This is a tough question, and one that many people struggle with their entire lives. It has to have an answer, for otherwise things would be unbearable. But what is it? This is not a new question. It is as old as civilization and can be found in the oldest texts in the world. There was some expectation that ultimately the gods would take care of whatever lack of justice was found in the world. This idea is not unusual in ancient myths and legends, but even the gods were not immune to miscarriages of justice, suffering from it themselves and frequently dishing it out. This is one of the major issues of the Bible. It can be found all over the various texts that make up the Bible if one knows how and where to look. It dates back to Cain complaining about why his offering was rejected while his brother's offering was accepted. The Bible demands justice as a divine obligation, but recognizes that things don't always work out the way we want. But it does have an answer to this eternal question. This week's Parsha is called Mishpatim, which fittingly enough means laws. This is a rather long Parsha, which doesn't stick with any storyline or theme. It rambles all over the place with laws and customs that seem to come in a somewhat random order and don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. There are plenty of laws that one might expect from biblical times, such as those dealing with the treatment of slaves or with various forms of personal damage. But there are just as many other laws that come out of nowhere, such as not eating the meat of a goat boiled in its mother's milk. It is not easy to organize these laws into some sort of system for justice, even though that is exactly what they were intended to be. One of the better known laws appearing right in the middle of the Parsha is the famous eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. This classic, which can be traced to an earlier code of law, but is found very prominently here and elsewhere in the Torah, has been traditionally understood in Jewish law to mean a monetary payment must be made to compensate for a bodily injury. This particular law follows immediately after the only case in the Torah resembling a forced miscarriage of a fetus. That case, which is likely the sole hint in the Torah of the law concerning abortion, imposes a monetary penalty for the loss of the fetus, but not, according to Jewish tradition, any capital punishment. These are but two of the many laws contained in this parsha. There are also basic laws concerning theft and other forms of personal damage. There are laws about loans, including the prohibition of taking interest for a loan. And of course, to enforce all of these laws, there has to be a system of courts and the administration of justice. The fundamental guidelines for such a system are laid out in the middle of the parsha, though it is obvious that much more was needed to develop a fully functional court system. Finally, there is the first mention in the Torah of the three pilgrimage festivals. Although Pesach has already been established a few parshas ago, the other two festivals, the first a summer harvest and the second a fall harvest, are mentioned for the first time along with Pesach. These two holidays would later be referred to as Shavuot and Sukkot, but here they are not called by these names. The reason for this was that the original celebration of these holidays was for the harvest. The basic requirement set out in the Parsha, which would be repeated elsewhere in the Torah, was that all males had to appear at the central national shrine for each of these festivals. The Parsha then goes into a fairly long section dealing with how the actual conquering of the land would take place. There was the promise of divine assistance, along with mysterious wasps, which would drive out the prior inhabitants of the land. The basic borders are given for the first time, along with the unequivocal command to drive out all those who lived in the land. There was to be no room for compromise here. The Torah closes with what seems to be a retelling of the events at Mount Sinai. It is unclear if this is a second description of the giving of the Ten Commandments, or if it is some subsequent religious experience associated with the mountain. Whatever the case, it includes a very dramatic description of an epiphanous moment when Moshe, Aaron, and the 70 elders are described as seeing a vision of the God of Israel, in which the motifs of a clear sapphire and the essence of the heavens are the only physical analogies that do justice to this monumental vision. It seems to be a kind of spiritual high point of the post-Exodus Israelite experience, which reaches a crescendo with Moshe ascending the mountain and entering the cloud of God's glory. He would remain there for 40 days and 40 nights. In the middle of all those laws, there is a brief series of verses dealing with the court system. These verses caution against the perversion of justice in any form, including, of course, the requirement to tell the truth. This section concludes with the general prohibition against bribery of any sort, which would obviously pervert any attempt at reaching justice. In the middle is a single phrase that doesn't seem to fit with what comes before or after. Quote, "Do not kill one who is innocent or one who is righteous, for I shall not justify the evil person." It is unclear what exactly was the intent of this short phrase. It seems obvious that an innocent or righteous person should not be killed. Why would anyone think that such a person could be put to death? What any of this has to do with the closing phrase, quote, "for I shall not justify the evil person," is left totally vague. Jewish tradition has a way of reading this perplexing half verse. It interprets the first part as referring to a court which has no conclusive evidence to convict a person, even though there is a possibility that the person is indeed guilty. The case at hand concerns a situation in which the death penalty would be called for. To this, the Torah is saying that an innocent or righteous person, meaning one who cannot be conclusively determined to be guilty, should not be put to death. Circumstantial evidence or anything else that might suggest guilt but cannot actually prove guilt is not sufficient to impose the death penalty. Even though there is some risk that justice will not be carried out, the Torah requires unequivocal evidence to impose capital punishment. But what about the fact that justice wasn't actually carried out? What if a guilty person is literally getting away with murder? It's all very nice to be strict in applying the death penalty, but there is still a requirement to find justice for the injured party. Does the Torah simply let the suspected party off the hook because there isn't enough evidence to nail them? This is the age-old question about justice. What happens when it cannot be found? This is where that final phrase enters the picture. I shall not justify an evil person. When all is said and done, the Torah brings God into the system of justice. A human court can take things only so far. They are only human and cannot know everything. But God does know what actually happened, and God has a secondary system of justice. Whoever the evil person was, even if they could not be conclusively identified, they are known to God. Whatever they might get away with due to the limited scope and power of a human court, they will have to pay a price at some point in their life. This may come in the form of some accident. It may be a loss of something that cannot be replaced. Justice may take the form of guilt and unease, or an inability to find true satisfaction in life because the person is carrying the burden of what they did like an emotional weight that can never be relieved. Somehow or another, justice has to be imposed, even if it is not necessarily the kind of justice that we might prefer. This is the Jewish version of karma, the harsh reality that everything we do has an effect on the rest of our lives. This can work out as a reward and it can work out as a punishment. But in either case, it is really nothing more than life working things out so that justice is always served, even if we cannot easily see it. It is not merely a human hang-up to demand justice in the world. It is something that God has divinely imposed upon the human mind. If we cannot manage to find justice on our own, God will bring it about through other means. Shabbat Shalom.